Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Maker's Bar. I'm your host, Troy Goldenberg. We're trying to create 1 million leaders. Today, I'm here with one of them, Noam Dworman. He's the owner of the Comedy Cellar, and he has a great podcast called Live from the Comedy Cellar, where he speaks about many different political issues. We'll get into those. Noam, thank you for coming on.
My pleasure. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. Big fan. I know I was kind of gushing over you before we hit record here, but truly big fan. I think you're a really important guy inside political discourse, and excited to hear your story. And on that note, the way I always start is, what is your story? What is your journey? You can start from childhood on, wherever you want to start that.
My journey, it's very new age. Well, I was born in 1962 in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I lived in Manhattan until I went to New York City Public Schools. I lived in Manhattan until 6th grade, where I moved to Westchester County to Ardsley, New York, where I still live now. I was a musician my whole life. I was very, I was a very precocious guitar player as a young boy. I played as an accompanist to a classical oud player in high school. I played in Carnegie Hall and Town Hall and places like that. I went to law school, University of Pennsylvania. And then after I decided I didn't want to become a lawyer, I reopened. The name is old, the Cafe Wah, but it had been closed for more than 20 years. So I opened the Cafe Wah in 1987. I played there for like 20 years, and my father died, and I took over the Comedy Cellar in 2003. And that's pretty much, and then been doing that since then.
Very cool. What is Cafe Wah? Is that a coffee shop?
No, Cafe Wah is it's a nightclub. It's a very famous nightclub where in the 60s, where Jimi Hendrix was discovered and Bob Dylan played. My father knew Bob Dylan, but then it was closed, and it closed in 68. And I reopened it, I guess, in 87 in a space that my father used to have, an Israeli nightclub. My father was a musician also. And then it became kind of famous all over again. But then I sold it in 2005.
Just to focus on the Comedy Cellar?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. What kind of music are you into before we get into everything else?
Well, I grew up playing classical, but I also I played the oud. So my father played Middle Eastern music, Arabic and Israeli music, and then of course I was heavily into all the music of my childhood, the Beatles and Motown R&B, and also got heavily into Hank Williams and country music and Roger Miller at one time, and very, very broad taste in music. Big Beethoven. I'm kind of a Beethoven expert.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Now that's an exaggeration. I know his symphonies very well. Yeah.
Gotcha. One of my buddies, one of my best friends, lives down in Austin, Texas. He actually made like beats when he was like 10 years old, all the way through college, and then just taught himself how to sing, taught himself guitar, and he has the widest breadth of music knowledge, music taste I've ever met. So I know when people like yourself, like, I'm always curious to learn about what you're listening to and what you're into.
Yeah, I mean all genres. The kind of like the consensus most important people in all genres, you can probably presume are geniuses in some way. And so if you recognize that you're hearing the product of some kind of genius, and if you do, it's not immediately appealing to you, if you recognize that that's your own inability to take it in, and you work on it, and you spend more time listening to it until you get some familiarity with it, it's very gratifying, and it's very rewarding. It open up a whole new thing that you can appreciate that you would have never had in your life. So that's kind of the way I used to approach things from a young age. I would hear about somebody being like a hugely respected artist within some genre of music, and then I would just buy it. When I was a kid, it was hard to get music. You couldn't just download it, right? So you'd go to like the record shop and order some records and just spend time listening to it over and over until you began to get the feel for it. Maybe pick up the guitar, try to learn the modes or the scales of it. And then at some point it would click and you say, oh my God, I love this, and then, have that pleasure for the rest of your life.
It's incredible. Actually, that translates well into something that I've seen. And I think a lot of people, I don't think I'm just speaking for myself, but a lot of people see in you on the podcast. we were having these intellectual, high level, oftentimes, they could descend into
name calling,
name calling argument.
No,
Yeah,
contentious,
contentious arguments. Just given a topic, most of the time, Israel Palestine topic, but other topics as well. That most people just can't have these conversations. I love these conversations. I try and have these conversations like all the time. But most people just can't have it. I think it's an inability to take in truths, and it's to take in, how do I even put this? To take in new information in a generous way that you could appreciate, to try and in the pursuit of truth, so to speak. So I can kind of see how that would translate into, hey, I'm trying to understand this genius and take it in, and eventually it clicks. Because especially someone like you and I, we have a bias in this topic, but any topic that anyone, any background, we can have a political conversation, any conversation at all, it could be sports even, right? That you have a bias, and there's an inability to take in new information that doesn't gel with the way you want to see the world. I think you've been as good at that as anybody I've ever seen. And you don't know me, you just meet me now. I do this. This is what I don't think I'm great at a lot of things. I think I'm pretty good at that, and I think as the years and years go on, I hope to be great at being able to have these conversations, and I listen to as many opinions as I can, as many people as I can. And that was really the thing about you, along with your knowledge of the topic, but really your generosity and your ability to take in information. It's rare. It's rare to have someone that's a truth seeker and a truth teller, and have that. While having that, you have an ability to push back, and not just let people ramble on lies or on something that you find to be audacious, so to speak. So I see how that translates. And on that note, sorry again, I promise I'm gonna try not to just like gush about you for 5 minutes at a time. But on that note, how did you start getting into this topic? How did you start getting into like the podcast world, kind of the online debate world at all? Like, how did this all begin?
Well, but I mean, there's two questions there. So how I got into like this stuff, this is not a unique Jewish upbringing, arguing about stuff at the dining room table, kind of getting berated by your dad, and forged by fire. And then and I was always interested in debatable topics and stuff like that. So then when podcasts began, sometime after podcasts began, but like, I don't know, 7-8 years ago, there was a comedian, Robert Kelly, who works at the Comedy Cellar, who was early into podcasts. He has a big one now. And he suggested we do a Comedy Cellar podcast. And I was kind of reluctant, but I said, all right. I thought maybe it was important for the important strategically for the club to be early into that world in case it became an essential part of our profile to the world. So I started a podcast, but there was mostly like comedians and stuff. That's all it was. It was just bullshitting with comedians. And then I think one of the first political guests I invited on was Jonathan Haidt. I read a column which was kind of a synopsis of his book, The Righteous Mind. And I thought, well, maybe I can get a guy like that on, And for the Comedy Cellar, yeah, what the hell? I've never been able to meet these people otherwise. And so I began to have a small trickle of columnists and stuff on the show that I would read in the Journal or in the Times. And I was surprised they would come on. And I kind of became friendly with some of them. And then the show, during the Trump-Russia thing, I was good at that issue. So I had like Neil Katyal and David Frum, and nothing ever hit big, but it was big enough to keep me interested. I mean, it's becoming a long answer. And then somehow when Israel happened, I don't know, I guess because it was such a third rail topic and so few people were able to speak about it without fear. My profile elevated after a few podcasts on Israel and Palestine. I didn't endeavor to become a big voice on it, let alone as I'm told from time to time now, an important voice on it. I never conceived of myself as having that. Of all the things I thought I could become in my life, an important voice in Israel and Palestine was something I never ever contemplated or would even have allowed myself to flatter myself to think I had the talent to do that.
You very much do. I mean, actually, real quickly, Righteous Mind is one of my favorite books.
Mhm.
And coincidentally, that Austin friend I was telling you about, he just started it after years of me telling him to read that book.
Anybody who's interested in politics, it's like 101. You have to read that book. You don't
incredible.
understand anything unless you read that book.
Yeah, how was that? I need to go back and watch that conversation that you had with him. How was that conversation?
I don't think it was video. It was just audio in those days.
Oh, wow.
It was great. I mean, the guy is a genius, and now, I mean, he's reinvented himself twice since then. Not reinvented himself, but come around again. Is influential. The Coddling of the American Mind, that book he did about, really early on, identifying the flawed theoretical basis of wokeness and trigger warnings and all that stuff. And then most recently being very influential in trying to protect children from the ravages of screens and devices that they I mean, I have 3 kids. It's a real issue.
Yeah. How old are your kids?
12, 11, and 7.
Okay. Young kids. And this is really the age where it's going to start really affecting mental health.
Especially for girls.
Yeah. I read The Coddling of the American Mind. I haven't read his new book about this specifically.
That's good too. They're all good.
Yeah. I'm sure I'll love it. And I'll get around to it. Right now, I'm just like,
if you don't have kids, you might be not as interested in the topic, just naturally.
Yeah. I do have nephews and nieces now, and one just turned 13. So there's a lot of them on my family. There's how many now? 9 nephews and nieces. The oldest one's 13. So maybe I'll read it and say, hey, just recommend it to the ones with the preteens and the teens coming up. But
sit a little bit higher. I have an idea.
Oh, you're fine.
Oh, wait. Okay, that's better. Go ahead.
All right. So I wanted to ask you, kind of one of the things I was planning on asking you was like, for you, because you've had on just like the biggest names, and like they're not even just. Oh, you're good. You can take a second.
What is this? I'm on the phone.
It's urgent, Manny. You need to go pick Manny up. The coach is here.
Oh, where's Manny?
I'm walking home, or Alex is.
Okay, tell Mom I'm gonna do a podcast.
She can't. She's on the hospital. Yeah,
okay, well tell the coach he'll be here in a minute.
No, he's waiting for Mom to pick him up.
Where's Yasmin?
She's sick.
Hold on one second, Troy. Can you pause it?
Yeah.
My kids.
No problem.
I can't. Yeah. Just so everything's okay. Yeah.
Okay. Good. No, not a worry. Not a problem at all. Well, I was gonna ask. So, like, you've been one of the only people that I'd say pro-Israel people, I should say, that have been willing to have on like these anti-Israel voices and like that people like me made. It's like I say big names in the discourse, but I understand I'm the weird one that's like really into this, like really wants to like dive down to the truth and right and wrong and all these things. So like names like Ken Roth that might mean nothing to somebody else. Yeah, I know, but like the normal people signs, all these humans. Dave Smith is an interesting one for me that I would love to touch on at some point. But all these types of people, and again, you do it with facts and the way that you even edit your podcast, like adding in the full context of paragraphs or books or whatever it may be.
I haven't been doing that as much lately, but yes, I like to do that. It's been too much for me. But go ahead. Sorry.
No, I know. I get it. It's a ton of work.
Yeah.
But you do it with grace, and you're not just having you do it in a responsible manner where, as this podcast grows, I've kind of started thinking more along the lines of like, okay, what's going to be kind of responsible for me to have on? Like, I'm going to have on a Ken Roth, or maybe on the other side, it'd be like a Candace Owens who just spews all this nonsense. Like, I feel like I have a responsibility to come very prepared for that, like knowing what they've said, and you do that in a great way. My question, kind of couple questions here, would be like, do you feel that responsibility? How do you prepare for those? And like, how do those ones well, you kind of have an idea this is going to be more contentious. Norman Finkelstein, one of those, but how do you kind of feel going into those? How do you feel after those? I know it's a lot of questions. You can take that any way you want to.
Well, I do try to prepare, of course. The first podcast that got a huge amount of really huge amount of attention for was with Phil Bump about the Hunter Biden story. And I had begun to look into that story. And I mean, just to cut to the chase, before I did that interview, I had already predicted the guy was going to walk off. Like I was so sure that he couldn't possibly have answers to the questions I was going to put to him. I predicted that he would get angry and walk out, which basically he did at the end. The only other person I thought the same thing of was Ken Roth, the former head of Human Rights Watch, and he basically did too. It was a Zoom call, so he didn't walk off, but he was supposed to be on for an hour, and he hung up like 35 minutes into it. And with neither of those guys did I ever say anything personal or anything, attack them. I just felt that they were such frauds and no one had ever really exposed them. But those are the only two examples of people like that. Otherwise, and Ken Roth, really, everybody should watch that. I mean, the guy is really, I just, and I don't speak badly about people.
No, you don't. I can vouch for that.
But he is, I will speak badly about him. He's just the worst. He's a dishonorable to his core. But
this discourse is full of humans like that. It's full of people, specifically in this topic. I mean, I assume so also I know so also in like the Trump.
I believe that's a Jewish guy like that. I mean, you could just see it. I left it in the interview a minute or so before we introduced him, and you just see his body language and his tight lips, and you could just, I mean, do people look like their personalities? Quite often they do, right? So, somehow as humans, we can pick up on these things. And he has this, all the manner of exactly what his personality turned to be. And the nasty, I don't know, spiteful way that he approaches this issue is just so transparent. So other people know, you have people in good faith, like Dave Smith, you said, Dave Smith's a good guy and we disagree. And I know you might find him infuriating, but
it's actually, so the reason I brought up him in particular is the infuriating things that I find about him. There's so many things. There's one thing actually, is that I really want to listen to people that are genuine, even if I disagree with them and find them infuriating. If you're genuine and you're coming from a place like, I think you really are a good person. The doctor you had on that wrote that article about the children that are being shot, I found him to be very genuine, even if I disagreed with some things that he said.
He was genuine, but there were certain things he said which were very difficult to integrate, right? To comprehend, like when he thought that there could be hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza who look like concentration camp victims, but nobody takes pictures of them and Hamas doesn't announce it to the world. I had trouble reconciling some of the things he said with some of the other things he said.
Myself as well. Actually, I was going to bring up that one specifically. I align with your thought of like, I would notice, like I pay so much attention to this. I see so many videos, so many, like I'm so in tuned. I would know, that is something that I feel like there's just no way to hide.
I would say that what he was saying there was as impossible as almost any other common sense conclusion I could come to on any number of things. It's just not possible. It's just not possible, in my opinion. I mean, I hope I don't live to have egg on my face, but it's just not possible, right?
Yeah.
So now, is he genuine? Yeah, he's genuine. He's genuine. So that's the mystery of humans. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think that would be like a bias thing. Which actually, again, the Dave Smith thing, like there's a bias. We all have a bias, and I want to believe, I want to listen to genuine people. And the thing is, I have a very difficult time seeing Dave as a genuine at times when he does the as a Jew argument that I see so often from leftist Jews. And it's like, man, I've listened to you talk a lot. And just out of, he's like maybe the libertarian voice on this topic and a lot of topics. But that's not your identity. That's not, and the thing is, like, if that was, I'd hear you bring it up. Like, I grew up in a small town, just so you know who I like, grew up in a small town in Kansas. I was like one of the only minorities. Wasn't
you and Fred Kaplan, the two Kansas Jews. You know that.
I don't even know who Fred is.
He's an important writer for Slate magazine. But go ahead.
Okay, I'll look him up. Yeah. But no, I appreciate bringing that up. But yeah, we're just like, I grew up one of the only minorities. My nickname was Jew. I loved it. As a young child, my nickname was Jew growing up. Like, it just was, and like it's just this big part of my identity. Even on Twitter as a teenager going to high school, like my nickname was Golden Jew the Fourth. Like, and like, being Jewish, like, you'll just hear me talk about it. And it's I have friends and family in Israel. They're like very formative moments of my life that have centered around being Jewish. Unfortunately, kind of revolved around murder of a Nazi came to the Jewish community center north of my small town, the town that I went to high school in, and he shot it up, killed a kid and his grandfather, and it's kind of like this. I didn't even know the kid, but it was just kind of this whole identity finding thing of like, oh, this is real. Like, this hatred you hear about that we make jokes about is real. I had a friend who was killed on the 7th. A camper of mine, I worked at camp for a year. There's a camper of mine that got killed diving on a grenade to save his fiance. And she did live, actually. She lived, and this is why we know the story. But the point is, like, there's all this identity that I have. Like, you'll hear me bring it up if you listen to me enough. I've listened to him a lot. I've never heard a story. I've never heard him talk about that with something like that with his family growing up or his kids now. So it's like when you say, well, I wish this wasn't true as a Jew, it's like, that's not your identity. That's not where you're coming from. Even if he is, Jewish and all that, like, your identity, at least politically online, is a libertarian. And you don't wish Israel was a good guy as a libertarian. You don't wish the Ukrainians were good guys as a libertarian.
Just as a little aside.
Yeah.
I know libertarians who are very pro-Israel. You don't see libertarianism as an inherently anti-Israel ideology, do you?
No. So I'd say there's a modern day definition of libertarian, or modern day group of libertarians.
Yeah.
Just like I'd see, not like when I say liberal, there's a modern day liberal, and there's the word liberal. Like, everyone in America is liberal, but there's liberals and conservatives.
Like, the Reason magazine crew, like Matt Welch and Nick Gillespie, they're quite pro-Israel.
I'd have to look into them. From my understanding of libertarians, and just the people that I've kind of talked to in life and in online form, libertarian today is pretty right-winged, but an isolationist in a sense. So you don't want our dollar, and I understand this argument, by the way. I'm not saying they're bad. Like, yeah, but they don't want our dollars going towards Israel or Ukraine. And if I'm somebody, and I'll let you respond here in a second. If I'm somebody who I don't want U.S. federal dollars, tax dollars going towards these countries, these foreign wars, it's in my interest to see our allies as bad, as like, hey, we shouldn't support them because they are bad, and that would be my bias. And when I see someone like that, at least from Dave Smith's libertarian, I guess I shouldn't blanket libertarian here, but from that standpoint, it's like, you're not being genuine, you're not being honest with me, like. That isn't what you want. You would rather have an excuse to not be involved. Sorry, but I'll let you respond to that now.
No, I hear what you're saying. It's you're making an interesting point that yes, libertarians are disposed to be isolationist, and I guess it's easier to to be comfortable with that position if you can at the same time feel that the countries that you're hanging out to dry, as it were, don't have a tremendous moral case to begin with. So it's just easier to sleep at night to know that you're not the countries that you're withholding aid from are countries in who maybe really don't deserve it anyway, right? So I never thought of that, but maybe that's where that's why he's inclined to be anti-Israel. But boy, he's really anti-Israel, you know,
He very
and
much is.
he really is. And look, I don't know many people like me. I know that, you know, when I read a story in Haaretz about Palestinian prisoners needing amputations because they're bound, you know, with handcuffs, my inclination is to immediately call up that reporter, you know, take a deep breath and prepare myself for what he's going to say, no matter how upsetting it's going to be to me in terms of how it makes Israel look, right? I've done that a few times. I don't really know anybody else like that, to be honest. I don't see Dave Smith or anybody like that, you know, calling in some reporter who printed a story about some terrible things that the Palestinians did to the Israelis and wanting to get to the bottom of that story. So I will have to acknowledge about myself that I am a little bit unique that way. I don't know where that comes from. I think I've just always been that way. And it partly, I know it comes from my urge to not want to be like the people I criticize, you know? So I just kind of force myself. That's why I called in the doctor from the New York Times story, Feroz Sidwa. This is a very difficult story, you know, babies shot in the head. But, you know, I want to find out for myself what it was, you know. I just need to know. That's all.
No, and it's one of the things that I think many have come to truly super respectful or respectable thing about you that we love, and I like to think I'm the same way.
It's hard. It's not
hard.
easy, and you get flack. I've gotten flack from Jews in high places, as you know, at the last meeting. No, but I've gotten. I mean, I don't want to exaggerate the. I didn't have any. I didn't end any relationships or stop getting, you know, invited to cocktail parties from time to time, but I had to defend myself, you know, and at times. This goes back to when I first had Finkelstein on, especially, you know, people were upset with me.
I understand like the inclination of being upset, but I found myself I was having conversations with Palestine before I was a host for Maker's Bar. I had my own podcast. We're a team here at Maker's Bar, and I was talking to as many people as I could. Druze, Jews inside Israel and Palestine, and Bedouins, Palestinians, as many people as I could. But after October 7th hit, I haven't been able to get people on my podcast that are Palestinian. That a Twitter space call I could get, but this level of tribalism kicked in, and I got introduced to all these people that lesser known. I'd say the people like myself that are interested, want to help, lesser known, put into these groups on Twitter or whatever it may be, and I found myself having an aversion to most of these groups because it was just so incredibly. I'm very incredibly pro-Israel, but it was just so incredibly just not truth-seeking. It was simply the online battle. The doctor story of the children, any story like that would come out, and it's like, here's how to go debunk this. Here's the best post. And it's like, well, is this true? I just like, and maybe it's my own upbringing. I grew up with a dad that wasn't necessarily political. It was like, hey, question question everything. You should be a lifelong learner. All these things, challenge to dinner. All the classic cliche things like, hey, what'd you fail at this week, or things like that. And and I have a brother who's pretty right wing libertarian, a brother who's pretty left wing.
Anti-Israel, your brother?
Actually, an interesting story. So I remember when we were kids, and when I say kids, I mean teenagers. So this brother's gay, and I think that actually really very much affected like the way he saw the world and kind of the friends he had. And he would say a lot of anti-Israel things whenever the conversation came up, which wasn't much, to be honest. But as he'd say a lot of anti-Israel things, and we were like high schoolers. And I think over time, I've brought both. I ended up being just dead center. I took a political compass test of the 4 boxes. I literally ended up dead center when I was 17 years old. I think I've shifted a bit, tiny bit left. And then again, when I talk about Israel, I feel like I'm a bit to the right. I don't know. But I could tell I just had these anti-Israel sentiments that just weren't true. And maybe that's maybe that played a factor in how I went about even doing my research in Israel. When I first started doing like actual research, like I wanted to know the truth, and I didn't have it as this super Jewish upbringing of. I never really learned the story of Israel. I just looked at Israelis as a very small child, and I was like, oh, they look like me. That's where I'm from. I'm kind of brownish and dark haired, and like, okay, and then you turn 13 or 14, 15. Oh, this was established again recently, and so when I started doing my own research into this, like I was like, okay, obviously this isn't all good. Like this isn't an all good thing. I was kind of searching for the truth. And anywho, you asked, my brother's anti-Israel. Let's say when we were younger, he was, but now he's a very proud Jew, and we live in Chicago. We both live here in Chicago, and he's had to stand up to his friends a bit because however it happened, is a whole other topic. But however it happened, the LGBTQ community just kind of ended up being anti-Israel to a very large extent. And now less than a year later, he's wearing a Jewish star. I have my necklace here. He's wearing a Jewish star. Never in a million years, but I thought that'd be a thing. So I think this whole event, and we had blowout arguments last year, October. I was very upset. Obviously, my friend got killed. Obviously, I'm into this topic. I know the history to a decent amount. I know the recent history very well. And we're just the rest of my family's kind of finding this Jewish identity, as my brothers are. We're all kind of questioning our own, as I'm sure your family is too. Maybe to a lesser extent with the youngest children, but I think like a year later, he's pro-Israel. I think he's learned a lot. I think that's happened to a lot of people. I actually think that's happened to the left. I'm an optimist, but I think that's happened to the left. Actually, I think this breaking point came where you were talking with Martin. Daryl, I can't remember his last name. You were just talking
Daryl Cooper.
Daryl Cooper. And he was saying how fascism is a response to the left, you know?
Yeah, he said it's an overactive autoimmune response to left-wing politics, or something like that.
When he said that, I thought about, okay, well, in my mind, the Trump movement is populist, to say the least, and that was maybe a response to the overindulgences of the left. Like there's this obvious anti-Semitism happening. I actually first posted about it in 2021. It was the first time I really noticed it on the left. Okay, this is a really bad thing that's happening. This feels very similar to the things I've read about in early 1300s England or 1920s, 1910 Germany. This feels very similar. This is bad. And there was an argument made by many of my Kansas friends about who never liked the left, but being made for a long time before that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could see that. And now something I've seen on the left that makes me very happy is there was a reaction to October 7th that was obviously very scary on campuses and in media, and even with the Tanasi Coates guy going around John Stewart and all these, just going on an admiration tour. Very scary. But there's also like a Brianna Wu, right? I've had on. She was just in the Free Press. Would love for you to talk to her.
Who's that?
Brianna Wu.
Oh, Brianna Wu. Yeah.
Fantastic human. Someone that I want to have back on to talk about specifically trans rights. And it's like, hey, what is your work on this? I want to hear about this from you.
For listeners, she's trans, correct?
She is a trans woman.
Yeah.
And she's always into progressive politics.
Mm-hmm.
She was a part of Gamergate. That's kind of what gave her a profile way back when. And she just kind of woke up to it. And people like Richie Torres, who I woke up back in 2020, 2021, this anti-Semitism, his profile is growing. And they voted out Cori Bush and another part of the squad. There was a reaction of, hey, this is not okay. And I am an optimist. I do think America is the best place ever, the greatest project people have ever put together. I think it's healing. I don't know why it takes the Jews to heal, but it seems to be a role that we play, is that we are kind of a thermometer for the morality of a country. That was such a long answer to is your brother pro or anti-Israel, but that's kind of what made my mind go. Does any of that make sense to you?
Yeah, of course. These are stories that are being similar versions throughout the Jewish community in the world.
Yeah. Anywho, I would love to hear about the other side of this. So you're talking to maybe more pro-Israel voices. Are there any conversations that stick out to you in particular that when I got Noam Dworman on, it's like, I went and told my friends, I got Noam Dworman to come on. Anyone like that? It's like, hey, I got this guy to come on. Very excited.
Well, I was very excited to speak to Chaviv Retigor,
Incredible guy.
That I had on with Coleman Hughes. Now, Coleman and I are friends, but and we're both Haviv. He writes his name Haviv, and I was wondering, is it Haviv or Chaviv? I don't know, but in English at least it's Haviv. And we were both excited to meet him and speak with him, and that was really good. He's really, I think he's the best overall, the best voice, the best pro-Israel voice there is right now. Who else did I have on? He was the big one. I had Ami Ayalon, who was former head of the Shin Bet. And he was good, but he was a little bit rote. A lot of the answers were answers that I heard him give elsewhere. And I don't know, who do you remember?
So yeah, the Haviv and Coleman Hughes one was great. Dan Sainer, I'm gonna say his last name wrong.
Yeah, I love Dan Sainer. He's done some events at the club. He's very good. His podcast is really fantastic.
I actually haven't listened to it, and then I kind of felt bad that I hadn't listened to it because he was saying, everyone that knows this topic, they listen to you. They go to the Call Me Back podcast, and
I listened to I haven't had them on, but I listen to John Podhoritz's commentary podcast quite often in the car.
Oh, really? Okay.
Do you listen? That's really
I have not. No, I'm gonna take all the notes on this and go back and take all the notes from what I listen to and read.
It's a daily podcast, and there's few people who are more knowledgeable about politics and about Israel than John Podhoretz. And he has a round table there with Abe Greenwald and Matthew Continetti and what's oh my goodness, I'm so embarrassed I can't remember her name. But they're very, very good. Christine Rosen. And sorry if she ever gets wind of this. And they're very, very, very good. And anybody who's interested in that topic should listen to them.
I'll check them out. Is there anyone that you want to have on that you're dying to have on that you haven't been able to get on?
No, I mean, I was happy to have Daryl Cooper on last week, but I'm kind of getting over this whole thing. I mean, I've had all the arguments. It's taken up a lot of my time. And I got tremendous satisfaction out of it, but I've even thought about stopping the podcast. I don't look forward to it quite like I used to. I don't feel like having the same debate over and over.
Yeah.
It's hard, as you alluded to before, it's hard to find honest people.
It really is.
There's a few big lies, which I would have liked to do a better job. I would like to have done a better job chiseling away at. And I found that, I really haven't made any progress. One of them is, the biggest lie is really that Israel doesn't want peace, that Israel didn't try to make peace, that I would like everybody to have it second nature by now that the territories became occupied in 1967 because Israel was attacked by Jordan. That, I had this whole thing with Aaron Mate on the podcast where I was saying, well, Israel was attacked by Jordan. Israel had even warned the Jordan king not to invade. He warned him twice, actually, and he invaded anyway. And there was and he's like, no, you got to read Avi Shleim's book, The Iron Wall. Let me double check if that's the name.
Yeah, it was The Iron Wall.
And I was like, all right, I'll go read it, So I go and read Avi Shleim's book, The Iron Wall. And it says exactly what I said. It's, it says even more than I said. It says that actually Israel, even Moshe Dayan, they never had any designs to take the West Bank. It happened all very quickly and by surprise. Israel was petrified before the 6-Day War. Basically, even he's a revisionist historian, but on this topic, he backed up all the most typical pro-Israeli arguments about how the occupation came about. So I sent it to Aaron and I said, listen, Aaron, I did go and read Avi Shleim, just like you said. And actually he says everything that I said and more. So he says, yeah, actually, yeah, you're right. You're right. But what about, but he says, but read this book. And I'm like, this literally, I said, Aaron, so, and it became clear to me, and I like Aaron, but I'm like, once it turned out that this guy that he respected, Avi Shleim, and that somehow his scholarly, I mean, if he had agreed with Aaron, this guy would have been an expert historian who was a scholar. Yeah. And as soon as it turned out that actually, no, he completely disagreed with Aaron and has all the footnotes. He's an actual historian. He goes into the archives. He's not just collating other people's research. He did his own research. And you would think Aaron would say, oh, wow, you know what? I got to look at that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not what I thought. He just amputates the source from his body of sources as if it didn't exist, and he grows a new one to the left of it, and that becomes his source. So obviously he's source shopping, if that's a phrase, and quote mines and source shops. And it's like the New York Times they always have an expert to, any opinion they want to make up. Joe Biden's not all. Well, we found Dr. Olshansky is an expert. He thinks that Joe Biden could likely be a super ager. This is what and more recently, what was something the other day? They had some expert opinion on some, I don't know, some ridiculous topic, and some expert says something. It's escaping me, but they'll always find an expert, and that's what but you know what? But the reason, well, how can you be friends with them? I say, well, because the people on my side of the argument are just as bad.
Yeah, no, like that.
They're not going to consult a scholarly source which tells them that Israel did something wrong. I mean, it took them years to embrace Benny Morris.
Yes,
even though he was clearly telling the truth all along. To any fair-minded person, it was obvious. The first time you cracked a Benny Morris book, that he was laying down facts that you're going to need to grapple with. This guy was not bullshitting. And it took years for him to be accepted by the mainstream. And of course, he greased his own skids by becoming politically of the right in many ways, but never having changed his scholarship, just changing his interpretation of the facts that he always laid out. And somehow that allowed people to embrace him a little bit more. But right and left are the same, come from the same human cloth. So that's it.
No, absolutely. I think when you look back at this time period, this is a Bill Maher point more so. I think he was the one that made this point, is that you're not going to look at, the historians won't be like, oh yeah, there was this group that was really bad, but this group was worse. They're going to look at us and be like, as a whole, like, what was happening? Why couldn't these people think straight? And it's a human condition, and it does exist on our side. It's actually kind of funny because, like, sometimes I'm having conversations with like a anti-Israel human. I'll catch them in a lie or something. Like, hey man, I could have this argument so much better than you could, because I've looked into this and I'm just honest about it. One of the things, if this ever catches wind, and this will become, I'm waiting for this fact to become, pro-Palestine, or not really pro-Palestine, anti-Israel talking point of who was the first person to say that Israel has a Nazi problem. Well, it's Jabotinsky. How do I know that? I read his book. And it's like, and I think Jabotinsky is an incredible, I don't know why we don't talk about him more in this discourse. Everything he said was right. I mean, not every, like.
Yeah, you have to understand Jabotinsky, because he is he is Netanyahu's hero. And so much of what people find inexplicable about Netanyahu is totally understandable if you understand he thinks Jabotinsky is the most important thinker on issues Israel. So that's where he's coming from.
I didn't know that, actually.
Oh yeah. So I mean, Jabotinsky's theory was that the Arabs, in those days, I think they call them the Arabs, not the Palestinians, would never agree to peace with Israel until they felt they had no choice. They would have to no choice whatsoever, an iron wall. And this has been Netanyahu's position his whole life. He said Oslo would fail. He said Camp David would fail. He was always a pessimist, never been proven wrong, because that's what he took from Jabotinsky.
I agree. I didn't actually. That's a human.
It's very pessimistic, you know. It's not that he opposes two states. It's not that he's first of all, he's not religious, and it's not that if God came down and told him, listen, if you agree to two states, I promise you there'll never be another act of violence from the Arab world. I believe he'd sign on the dotted line in a heartbeat, right? It's all about his view that it would be irresponsible to do so, because it will just become a new base for terrorism. And of course, now with Iran, it's triply pertinent, because Iran will, we know, seek to undermine any Palestinian territory they can get a foothold in. So that's where he's coming from. You know,
I understand where he's
it
coming from.
It sounds like I'm supporting him, and in many ways I do support him, but I wasn't meaning to support him. I'm meaning to just lay out, steelman his position, as it were.
I understand. And I actually agree with that. I like to think we've reached a point where many Palestinians understand Israel's here. It's a Jewish state. It's not going away.
Many's not enough.
I think a few would be enough if it was the right few. If it was the elite, I think the elite have never once thought that. No?
Nope.
You think it has to be all?
It has to be a critical mass. I've talked about this on other podcasts. You know, in a democracy, in a Western state, a critical mass is an electoral. Doesn't have to be a majority. We don't even have a popular vote in our country, but it has to be an electoral majority. So,
what about in Egypt, though? What stopped made peace?
What I'm saying is that in a Western state, if 51% or 49.5%, but they win the electoral college, wins, and then the president signs a treaty or a deal, that's binding, and other states can rely on that. In a Palestinian state, it's not even clear whether the leadership can promise that some other militia won't continue to send rockets even after a peace treaty.
That's true.
And then, of course, heads of state change in this part of the world through the barrel of a gun regularly. Sadat was assassinated. So, you know, you have to be able to say, okay, let's say, you know, Arafat, but whoever it is, Abbas, actually agrees to it. Now you have to say, no, he can control the weaponry and the you know, all the ordinances. Is that the word? You know, throughout the Palestinian territories. No, he will be able to resist a coup by Hamas. Hamas took over in a coup once before. That he'll be able to prevent Iran from undermining his regime. These are, you know, you can put all the probabilities on him. I think he probably can do this. He probably can do that. And say, well, okay, now I want you to risk the lives of the Jewish people on it. And you're saying hell, and you say hell no. Like, it's easy for us to say it, and they say no effing way. We're going to risk it all on the fact that this Arab leader won't get assassinated.
No, that's that part of it is that you're playing these games. So I talked to Peter Beinart once again before Maker's Bar. I don't know if he talked to me again. He might. But my issue, and I think many people's issue, is like
he believes in a one-state solution.
He believes in a one-state solution,
which I think is mentally ill.
I think that's actually, I think that is unattached to reality.
When I say mentally ill, I know it's not respectful, but all right, let me take it back.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what it is, but when a super smart guy like Peter Beinart maintains a position, I mean, maybe I'm the one with a mental problem, but maintains a position which really seems absurd, that no smart person can lead, you begin to then wonder, you begin to search for other explanations. What is going on here? And a disconnect of some kind is that's really what I mean by mental illness, is what it seems to be. The notion that you could have a single state with a Muslim majority, and that that the Muslim majority wouldn't turn on the Jews in the way that every tribal majority in the Middle East turns on, every Sunni majority turns on the Shiites, every Shiite majority turns on the Sunnis. All the bloodshed, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people dead throughout the Middle East in the last 15, 20 years. As I understand it, it's 100% based on tribal violence. And so that's one thing. The other thing is that, you're going to have equal rights for all, but equal rights will be the lowest common denominator of rights that all the people can agree on. So you're not going to have equal rights, for what's that?
Should be like no rights. No one would have
any
rights.
That's right. Well, I mean, I don't want to say you have no rights. I don't know, but you will definitely won't have a right to be gay. I've joked. You'll have men and women will have equal right to circumcision, but but I mean, so obviously you can look. You would say, well, Peter, well, let's cast an eye at the rest of the Muslim world, and let's measure what rights do they generally want their people to have, and let's just presume this single Palestinian state. That's sort of what we can expect. There's no reason to expect more than that, right? What kind of rights do they have in Gaza now? What kind of rights do they have in the West? So obviously that can't work, Peter, right? Because you've been to Tel Aviv, where men are walking around holding each other's hands, and trans people live like everyone else. And despite the feints towards judicial overhaul, Israel has a very robust tradition of completely free expression and free press and debate. And obviously you have to know that that's not the way a majority Muslim state is going to be. As a matter of fact, even in our highly populated Muslim cities, like in Michigan, whatever it is, they are already protesting against that kind of behavior in the United States of America. So how can you possibly think that a single state would work? But he does believe a single state will work. And so you explain it to me.
Does.
Either I'm missing something or he is.
I would love to have a conversation with him and you, because he was nice. That was the thing, is that if someone's great, kind,
he's a nice man. I've dealt with him. He's a nice
man. I do think he's I do think you say he genuinely believes these things. So a lot of times people say this, and I think it's really like, okay, you just want Israel to go away. Like, that's really what it is. You want the Jewish state to go away.
I don't think he wants Israel to go away.
I don't think that either.
But he says he's an Orthodox Jew of some kind.
I actually believe him. Again, I'm going to talk to Dave Smith. I would love to talk to Dave Smith, because I think he's a smart guy. I think he does believe in his positions. I think he kind of lies about his biased identity there. But with Peter, the thing is, like, he genuinely believes these things. And my question is, like, okay, well, what's the percentage chance you're wrong, and why should Israel risk that? Because if you're wrong, all the Jews are dead. The Israelis are dead.
I want to add something. It's also a completely academic conversation. Even if you could prove the case that Israel would do well in a one-state solution, they're not going to have a one-state solution. No country is going to decertify itself in that way. And the Jewish state, which is conceived of to be a constitutionally Jewish homeland, is not going to turn itself over to a Muslim majority. That's just, as a practical matter, it also shows a disconnect.
Of course. I'm with you 100% there. Yeah. I also, if there's any country that's not going to do it, I think, speaking of identity, a national identity, one of the national identities of Israel is, like, one of the forming identities, truly, is we are legitimate, we're not suicidal. And I think that's actually kind of a unique thing with Israel, because have you seen Habib Gur's 2-part lecture that he gave to some American students?
Yes, at the university, I saw most of both. Yeah,
great lecture. And so, like, about a third, 25% to a third of the people fighting for Israel's independence were people that said, okay, we're either going to die here in this refugee camp, or we're going to go fight for our existence. Like, it's literally in the core of this country. And then 1 million Mizrahi Jews, Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, came in and like, hey, we're going to choose to exist. And it all just boggles my mind, truly.
Well, this is why I've gotten so frustrated with the whole topic. So, like, you speak to Norman Finkelstein or Dave Smith, or even this guy I spoke to the other day, Dr. Sidwa. I say the Arabs don't want peace. Hamas is never going to make peace, and then they will find some obscure. And by the way, even these obscure things don't actually hold up. Some obscure interview, in some paper from 2009, where some mid-level Hamas guy said that, well, yeah, maybe we'd be okay with 67 borders. We'll never, and say, aha, you see, they want peace. I was like, well, actually, if you look at it, Dave, and you look at the document, he did say that, but they also said, but we'll never, ever recognize Israel. And we'll always want to see it, obviously. And it comes down to, listen, when you want peace, as Sadat wanted peace, it's not hard to express it. Like, the fact that you have to go to the library and whip out the microfiche, as it were, to find and search, through all the modern abilities to search every word ever published, and you can find some phrase which resembles what you're trying to prove. Don't you think if the Palestinians were yearning for two states living side by side in peace and harmony, you would be hearing that all the time from their leaders, as you used to hear it all the time from Israeli leaders, as you still hear it from the Israeli left? Yair Lapid, will make a speech. We want two states. We want to help you. We want to see you prosper. All we want is to see you stop the rockets. We have a plan to help Gaza. He made a speech to the UN, and it becomes just like this notion that people are totally motivated by these good intentions that they never ever express is so credulous. People, 95% of what you need to know about a person is right there in front of you. If the Palestinian leadership was yearning for peace, they would say, we're yearning for peace. We just want you to do X, Y, Z, but there's got to be some way. Can't we get you to do these things? Because we don't want to die anymore. You don't want to die anymore. Let's sit down. Let's hammer this out. As opposed to every single round of peace negotiations ending with the same story, including with Obama. You can look it up, where Arafat never responded. Abbas never responded. Obama asked him, and Abbas never responded. He preferred to talk about the fact that Israel shouldn't be a Jewish homeland. And this is the thing over and over and over again. And then you read a book like, now I'm like rambling, Rashid Khalidi, would try to make the case that the story about what happened in Camp David and the Clinton parameters wasn't accurate. So you go by Rashid Khalidi's book, the 1,000-year something in Palestine,
the 100-year war in Palestine.
100 years.
I tried. If I would have
read the footnotes. There are no footnotes. I mean, there's footnotes. There are no sources. You read a Benny Morris book, every single claim, every single assertion is footnoted to the page and paragraph of the document and book that it came from. To read Rashid Khalidi, it's just like it has a title of a book. It's like below the level of a fourth grade bibliography. But this passes for scholarship.
Yeah, that's a whole problem in itself.
Yeah, it's a huge problem.
I don't know how you solve that one. It kind of speaks to the lack of trust in institutions that kind of that has given a rise to this populist movement that I think Trump embodies, of we don't trust institutions, and there's reason not to. They've given you reason not to. But what it's birthed on the other side is also just super dangerous, and it's more and more normalized. Not just within our context, what we're talking about, Israel Palestine, but like in a broader context, it's crazy times. Like an optimist American, George Friedman wrote a couple books I like a lot. One was The Next 100 Years. The other one was The Storm Before the Calm. Both are saying America's going to be great. It's going to be fine. It's all going to work out. I'm an optimist, but I think it will all be okay. But it's definitely a scary time and a scary path we're going down. And in 2021, I couldn't get 1920s Germany out of my mind. I couldn't get 1300s England out of my mind. These books and these articles I'd read, it was like, this feels so similar. Like, this feels so similar as to what was happening in those times. Now,
No, it's not. It's not
2040.
similar. It's not similar to those times. Breathe.
I
There's
again,
no Nuremberg laws. There's a lot that's not going on. Yeah, it's not quite.
I think we're gonna be okay. I think it'll all be fine.
There is something going on. What's happening is a reversion to like 1940s and 50s America and 1940s and 50s level of country club anti-Semitism, the likes of that my father has described to me, or that Alan Dershowitz talks about when he graduated first in his class from, I think it was Yale Law School, and he got rejected by every law firm he applied to. That is not
I
absurd. I don't think we're pre-Holocaust in America. No, I don't see that.
I don't think we're heading that way by any means. I also just this country is just it blows me away the more I know about this country and where we came from and where we are today, and just it's so different than everything else I've ever seen, I've ever read about. Obviously, I'm American from the heart of America, very biased. I definitely had that bias put into me as a child in Kansas. Is how great this country is, but anyway, I want to transition to very quickly you at the Comedy Cellar, your kind of your life there. I'd also like to say, before you give up this podcasting thing, if you want to give it up, have you ever considered going on Joe Rogan and talking about this stuff?
Well, I've never been invited, so being a guest on Joe Rogan isn't something you consider. It's something that you're asked to do.
Would you consider it if
if Joe Rogan invited me on his show? I get a lot of stage fright. I would probably have to do it because I probably have to do it because it would be, I would get a lot of grief. My wife would never forgive me for not doing it, but I'm not upset if I'm not invited. That's a tremendous microscope to go under. And I don't know what the consequences might be if I say the wrong thing or something. I don't know.
I feel like you'd be great at it. I mean, you've had such different conversations, and I can't imagine you more than 2 phone calls away from that. Being the owner of the Comedy Cellar, I'm not like huge into the comedy world, but when I think of the most famous comedy clubs on the planet, the Comedy Cellar comes to my mind.
Well, Rogan is doing a show. He's very smart. He's very canny. He knows he doesn't care what my resume is. He has to think that this is going to be interesting to his listeners for 2.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And also, this is conjecture, but also I don't think Rogan is eager to have guests come on there and really, really disagree with him in a motivated way. It happens from time to time. Coleman kind of schooled him, for lack of a better word. Maybe that's not the right word, but Coleman really spoke up powerfully for Israel in a way that Rogan had to say, "Oh, well, you know more about this than I do," and then Rogan, swiftly changed the subject.
Yeah,
but what's he going to talk to me about? So I don't think he would want me on the show. But I don't say that. I don't blame him. Like if I were him, I don't think I would want me on the show. That's
interesting. I hope that's not true. I hope if you get the invite, you can take me. I would love to see you on there just to see what the two of you would talk about for 2 hours.
He performed at the club years and years and years ago. I'm pretty sure. I remember the name from when we first opened, but I've never met him. But everybody I know knows him, like Ari Shaffir and Mark Normand and Robert Kelly and Tom Papa and all people I know very well. They all go on his show pretty regularly. And Coleman's been on twice.
Yeah, Coleman's a great advocate. When I was talking to one of my buddies I was like, I'm having Noam Dworman come on the show, and he didn't know who you were. Again, I know I'm the weird one with being so interested in this topic and trying to find the truth of things and all this stuff. But I was like, oh, dude, you gotta watch him with this guy and this guy. And I brought up Cole, and I brought up Coleman Hughes, and it's like, oh, I love Coleman. Coleman's on Rogan. You ever see that one? Like, he's such a good and so he's popular in my circle of just good guy, moral clarity, try to search for the truth.
Who's that? Coleman?
Yeah, Coleman.
Yeah, absolutely.
Coleman's a great guy. So I do want to hear a bit about your experience at the Comedy Cellar, growing up with it, with your dad, being the owner of it, kind of your experience in the comedy world? Because
Well, it didn't open until I was already in college, so I didn't grow up in the
okay,
comedy. So yeah, and then so it opened when I was in college, and I was in school. Hold on, I'm doing a podcast. Well, come say hi.
No, I'm not. Who is it?
I'm a guest on a podcast.
Sorry, I'm like on a podcast.
Come here, come say hi. This is my wife.
It's just a nobody.
Uh-oh.
Hi, my, can you hear me?
She can hear you now. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Troy.
Hi, Troy.
It's nice to meet you. I'm just a nobody. I'm just a 28-year-old kid that thinks your husband is a great guy, and I wanted to learn more about him.
One of you has to.
Oh, somebody has to.
Can you leave me alone now, please? Let me. Okay, go ahead, Troy. Sorry. So the club opened after I was in college, and then and as I told you, I spent most of my 20s and 30s, all of my 20s and 30s after law school, playing music at the Cafe Wall, which is right next door to the Comedy Cellar. So I was around it all the time, but I wasn't involved in it. But I did know very well Jon Stewart and Ray Romano and Dave Chappelle and a number of the people who became very famous. Jon Stewart was a busboy down the block. He would come over to the Cellar. He was dating one of the lead singers in my band. And then I had a girlfriend, and my girlfriend and his girlfriend were best friends for a while. So yeah, I knew him very well. And Dave Chappelle was a young kid. He used to come sit in with our band, and he'd sing the blues, kind of a funny blues.
Super cool. Do you ever talk to Jon Stewart lately?
I haven't spoken to him in a few years. Last time he came in, you'll never guess what we argued about.
What was it? What do you argue about?
Israel Palestine.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I learned recently he's a kind of an anti-Israel guy.
He always has been. I mean, I don't know if he's anti-Israel could cover a lot. I don't believe he wants Israel to be ended.
Yeah, you're right. That is too much of a blanket. I'm using blanket statements here, anti-Israel libertarian.
Well, no, you know what? The truth is that until recently, if you said anti-Israel, it meant something related to the occupation. And one of the things that changed, it began to change before, but it really changed in a profound way after October 7th, was that the debate shifted to being about 1948 and whether Israel should exist at all.
Yeah.
And now when you say somebody's anti-Israel, it's not clear which camp they're in. Are they in the anti-Israel camp that says Israel's responsible for the occupation and blah, 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 and they should unilaterally, whatever they might think about the post-67 world? Or do they mean river to the sea? Because river to the sea is becoming a huge, if it's not a majority position in the anti-Israel world, it's not a tiny minority position either. 30-40%.
No, absolutely. And you saw that at the CBS. So actually the Jon Stewart river to the sea, you saw that with the CBS outlash of the Coates interview. Tony, I'm blanking on his last name.
Dr. Kupel, I don't know how to pronounce his name.
Kupel, yeah, Kupel's correct to me. Sorry, Tony, if you ever see this, and we'll get there.
No, we should get it right. Go ahead.
I watched that interview, and it's actually just fair. It was actually just like hey man, this kind of seems extreme, and what about this part and this? And like, honest is very fair in my mind. And the outlash was insane of it. And so then I read not the whole book, just the part about Israel, that last part. And
he came on a bit strong at first by saying without the cover, it would read like something appropriate in the backpack of an extremist. Now, you can assess that as a strategic matter, whether that was the smartest, best way to approach the question, whether that little kind of almost verging on ad hominem thing. I guess it's not ad hominem, but it's harsh.
I was gonna say I read again. I didn't read the whole book,
but let me just finish. Okay, yeah. But in a time when we see this kind of tone from reporters all the time, people on the approach pro-Trump right-wing guests with that kind of thing. The way Coleman was treated on the View, where they attacked him as a charlatan, whatever. How can they complain? All right, there was one little sentence. You might have, in retrospect, rephrased that one little sentence, but the question itself, the heart of the matter, was totally 100% fair game. 100%.
And the reason they had backlash against it because it went against the ideology of, in this case, CBS, but like just the left. And like I didn't really pay attention to the guy. He was on Jon Stewart, so I assumed anti-Israel to some extent, and I didn't pay attention to any of it until that happened, until this backlash happened. To what I thought was a very fair interview, and yeah, he could have rephrased it. He could have said it in a gentler manner, opened differently, and things like that. But I read that book again. Just the Israel book. That is negative. It does seem like someone that's just an extremist. Like, I mean, someone that you find the backpack of an extremist. Like, yeah, that like it was a lot of it was false. It completely ignored the Second Intifada. It completely ignored everything. It compared Israel-Palestinian relationship to white and black in America and him growing up in Baltimore. I was like,
I can't even understand. I read the whole thing. I have it on
the end.
I read I spent like half an hour reading it, just that chapter. It's like if I was a high school teacher and I assigned an essay on a topic to my kids, and the point of a high school teacher is to teach them how to think, not what to think, meaning I don't care which side of the story they take, but I want to show that they learned how to think about an issue from both sides. I would have to give that book an F. I'd say you've completely ignored the other side of you haven't even considered or pretended to consider the other side of the argument. So I haven't taught you how to think, because that's how you're supposed to think. I don't understand how he gets away with that. And it's an example of something I alluded to before. So like, yeah, I could totally see some Israeli or some Israel sympathizer writing something equally tendentious, but I would be the first one to say, well, you can't not mention their side of the story. As a matter of fact, you're not convincing unless you give the best version. This is really the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
You have to give the best version of the other person's argument. And then if you can, you have to prevail over that argument with your own argument. And in that point, maybe you can consider persuading somebody in a way that's on the up and up, as opposed to what can be persuasive sometimes, which is kind of like a pornography of barbaric vignettes and horrible things that have happened to people, and descriptions of of just things which just tug at your heartstrings, and you just unrelentingly attack somebody with these things, kind of the opposite of sitting there like the guy in Clockwork Orange, having to see all the until they kind of submit to that point of view. But that's a totally emotional kind of brainwashing, almost like a Stockholm syndrome related type way of shaping somebody's mind. It's brainwashing. But if you want to convince people, as I said, on the up and up, rather than just marinating them in visions of atrocities, then, as I said, you have to give the best arguments of the other side. And then you have to show that those arguments, even the best version of their arguments, cannot win the day. That's how you do it. And he doesn't even attempt to do that. And I don't think what I'm saying is controversial. I thought that's the way all intellectuals thought. I thought that we as intellectuals look down our noses at people who didn't see it that way. That's why we're the public intellectuals, right? Because we understand these, how ideas and intellectual and arguments, and we understand the danger of emotional appeals. We are allergic to emotional appeals. That's not what we do. That's why we don't like populism. That's why we don't like Trump. He's the guy we don't need to know the story about the other side of the story about the immigrants. All we need to know is that some immigrants came in and killed somebody, right? That's what Ta-Nehisi Coates is saying. That would be his argument on immigration. We don't need to know why they're here, or what we've done, or anything. All we need to know is, did you see the fact that they killed these people? How could you be pro-immigrant now? These immigrants killed somebody. That's his argument.
Yeah.
I don't need to,
No, I
I don't even need
agree.
to know how they got there or why or what caused the fight even.
I agree. But like, the more I looked into the guy, it concerned me that he's even taken seriously in the first place. Is as this blows up, and I'm on Twitter, you come across some of the quotes from his old books and his old writings, and he couldn't find empathy on 9/11 for the cops and the firefighters because they're American, and he had to think about
Ta-Nehisi, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no,
Are you sure? That's pretty harsh.
I'll look up I'll DM it to you on Twitter. I'll go look it up after this, and but what he was talking about was like all I could think about was like the people in that same spot that were murdered by the settlers, the colonialists, 300 years ago, 400 years ago, and so that's what his mind goes to, and like honestly, like if I'm having a hard conversation with somebody, I'll have that hard conversation with somebody, but to have that guy as this uplifted person, that like he was on an admiration tour on Jon Stewart and Trevor Noah and all the mainstream media, but a lot of the mainstream media. That was concerning to me, and that kind of goes back to the Martyr point of there's a reaction to this.
Well, I said that to Martyr. I said, that my problem with I do understand in some way the argument that I don't think this is even remotely true to the subject at hand at Gaza, but I do understand that when you want to compare it to Nat Turner's slave rebellion or like a Warsaw uprising, which I don't know the details of that, but imagine, people being held in concentration camps or in a starving in a ghetto. I do understand that you can, it's akin to like a battered wife syndrome defense, which many people respect, which is at some point you just break somebody and they do something horrible, and the amount of psychological pressure that and misery that you've put these people through is the reason that they went and killed your kids. And though we can never say it's right to kill kids, but as Ta-Nehisi says, how do I know I wouldn't have done the same thing in a rage? That fine. These are deep philosophical arguments. But as I said to Daryl, okay, you're saying if psychology can lead to massacres, certainly psychology can lead to checkpoints.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you're ready to forgive somebody for because of what you put them through for massacring women and children at a concert, and you say, well, I could see maybe, God forbid, I would do the same thing. Well, how about if somebody's blowing up your kids in their schools and on their buses, they say, fuck it, we need a checkpoint here to make sure that the people coming in are not carrying weapons anymore. No, that's wrong. No checkpoints. This is where it becomes laughable. Like you want to start making psychological arguments. Okay. But everybody has a psychology. So what's the Israeli psychology, and what allowances are you ready to make for the Israeli psychology? Oh, no, I'm not interested in the Israeli psychology. I don't even need to consider it. And that's why you would think that nobody would even take this guy seriously. You would come on. But you would think. But when you not because he's necessarily wrong, because his methodology is something that intellectual people should not and never have respected.
Yeah, but there's not just this topic. This topic is near and dear to both our hearts. But there's an uplifting of these voices when they preach something that you want to be true. And at Norman Finkelstein, one of the things that blew my mind when I was learning all about him and watching him he was debating Benny Morris on Next, and Benny said, "Hey, the reason you're saying this is because you never actually talked to an Israeli pilot." He goes, "I never want to." It's like, you don't want to? Yeah, I want to talk to. If I'm you, if I have the luxury of being like one of the main voices in this, I want to talk to everybody. I'm me. I'm a 28-year-old nobody. I want to talk to everybody I can. And it's just like the way that he goes about his research and his conversations and who he wants to talk to, all these things, like you would think it would just be this isn't somebody we should take seriously, that should be uplifted, but they are. And again, and then you see the problem on the other side too. I don't mean just like criticize people that are on the left would be considered leftist or whatever, because you can see the problem on Tucker as well. Like I actually, after you talked to Daryl Cooper, and actually even just like your conversation on Twitter when everyone's having this reaction to Daryl Cooper and the Tucker interview, I mean, I definitely had before that, like, okay, this guy's probably just another anti-Semite. But I don't think that actually. And it was kind of, honestly, it was because that Twitter back and forth you had. I was like, I'm going to watch this conversation. But the reason Tucker had him on, that Tucker had Candace on, that Tucker had Thomas Massey on, there's a reason. And he wanted to get to a specific point. So there's the problem with Tucker. Candace Owens has the top 5 podcasts in the world right now, built almost purely off the back of anti-Semitism. So there's a problem on the other side too. And like these voices get uplifted despite their lack of intellectual honesty and going about an argument the right way. Because if I know we're both pro-Israel here, but like if I take the opposite side, I kind of go with the Jabotinsky route of, well, this is a true story. I have a cousin who married a girl whose not grandfather, but ancestor came over on the Mayflower. He was a preacher. He settled in New Orleans. Her family is in New Orleans to this day. That's a native. They're native. If someone came in and said, "Hey, we're going to build a state here," or a lot of people we're not giving up our home. We've been here for hundreds of years. We're not moving. I understand that, and from the Arab, now Palestinian point of view, like, no, you're not going to build a state here. Like, and name me the population that everyone said, okay, you know what, you're down. Even if they knew our story, which they didn't, they thought we were more like the French and the British colonialists, and they really did think that. And even the French said, hey, we're just like the Jews, we're just like the Zionists. But even if they said, hey, we're downtrodden people and we need somewhere to stay, and this is our old home and all that, even if they accepted all that, go point out another civilization ever that's accepted that, and you just won't find it. And that's why I agree with Jabotinsky. And then, although I didn't know, I agree with that. And
yeah, well,
I
didn't say quite. He didn't say quite that, but yes. I mean, I understand the argument.
Yeah. So, but
there are many important differences between the history of Israel and Palestine with that narrative that you laid out. Among them are the fact that, of course, this was originally the land of Israel.
Yes.
That the Jews were chased out. 2, that Jews for most of the 19th and 20th centuries were always a majority in Jerusalem, or almost a majority, or just barely a minority. The presence was always there. That when they started to come over, much of the land, like Tel Aviv, was uninhabited land. That much of the land they bought, much of the land they took was purchased. Purchase, I understand that tenants who were then evicted because their landlords purchased something, especially through our modern views of what's right and fair in terms of how housing is treated as a private property, but as a somehow quasi right, is upsetting. Nevertheless, these were legal transactions, and of course the fact that there was a people there that was not Palestinian, that was Arab, part of the huge, not distinguishable from the Jordanians, and so Israel Jews arrived there as refugees. They were in trouble in their home, in the countries they were living in, and they decided, well, we can't stay here. Let's go join the existing and also ancient Jewish community in Palestine. Expand it, not arrive in China and carve out. I'm going to be the first Jew in China. We're going to carve out a homeland out of China. We're going to arrive in a place that is, part of this huge plot of land administered by the Ottomans and then the British. And that was anciently Jewish and is currently Jewish, not majority Jewish, but parts of it are majority Jewish. Jerusalem is majority Jewish, and but still
was until the 20s.
And we're going to go there, and we're going to go there and legally expand our presence there, expand our community there, in the hopes that when the actual colonialist should cut and run, we will be left with a plot of land for ourselves. Now, injustice ensued from that, wars ensued from that, and at some point, actually, you say, well, whatever happened, just like you say about the Native Americans in America, I mean, you want to concede everything 100%. It's like at some point you say, well, all right, what are we going to do now? Right? We're not.
Yeah.
We don't say, 100 years from the time that we did what we did to the Native Americans, we weren't considering maybe disbanding the United States of America. That ship had sailed, right? Israel is there. It's an entire nation. And they have to make a settlement. And if they want cash payments for land that they were chased out of in a war that their leadership started, of a genocidal war, then yeah, pay them. I'm sure you can get a huge fund of Jews in the world if Israel can't afford it, and the United States, to pay off some sort of reparations to Palestinians who can make the case that they were unjustly treated. However, don't make no mistake that the Nakba, the expulsion of 750,000 Palestinians one way or another, was a case of people being chased out in the midst of their people fighting a war to actually, the quote is, drive the Jews into the sea. And they were pushed out, not into a foreign country. They were pushed over the line into their own land. They were not pushed they were pushed from one part of Palestine, quote unquote, to another part of Palestine. This is the Nakba. And the fact that this can't ever be settled, I think, just speaks to the fact that this is being used as a pretext for a refusal to ever resign themselves to accepting a state of Israel. I don't believe it is about the yearning to live in some Israeli city which finds itself on the other side of the line. I don't believe that, because you could take money for that.
No, I agree. I agree with that. A better analogy.
It's not about the plot of land.
No, I agree. And it never really has been. But a better analogy would have been, let's say there's still a Native American presence inside Louisiana, and they start coming, for whatever reason, they're getting driven out where they're at, and they start coming, buying land back, and the Jews owned 7% before the Civil War. 7%. Palestinian Arabs, as they would come to be known, owned about 12 to 13%. Which is one of the things that actually does drive me crazy in these debates that I almost never hear anyone debunk. Is like, the Jews only own 7% of the land, and they're implying Palestinians own 93%. But that's just not true. It was still mostly Ottoman owned, like foreign investor. A lot of it was foreign investment. And anywho, that would have been a better analogy. I thank you for trying to put that back into where
who can imagine that all the suffering that have gone on for these poor Palestinian people now for a long time, and continues to go on, and it just got worse than it's ever been.
Yeah,
with 1 or 2% of their population in Gaza dying. How can they continue? Who can continue to argue that this makes practical sense? There is a moral obligation to accept the practical. There just is. Israel's not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. You just set into a chain of events. Whether you think Israel was wrong or right, the fact is you had reason to understand that Israel was going to do that. If everything you've been saying about the Jews is true, you certainly knew this is what they were capable of when you attacked on October 7th, right? You never said, oh, the Jews won't slaughter us because they're a peace-loving people. You've always said they're Nazis. So now you attack the Nazis, and you got the Nazi-like response that you would have predicted. I'm being
obviously.
Yeah.
Obviously
And you want to do this again and again and again. So how many tens of thousands of your own people can you justify allowing to be killed in an awful way in the pursuit of something which you know goddamn well is never going to happen? It's never going to happen, right? Israel's not going anywhere.
I'm with you. Actually,
but kill another million of your own people, bang your head on this brick wall, and get the sympathy of the world is with you because you're ready to kill your own people on something that's never going to happen. I don't understand this.
That's the issue. Well, we're pretty practical people,
and just make no mistake, they're not fighting, demanding Israel pull out of the West Bank. It's river to the sea. They don't even, thank God, because Israel's on shakier ground with some of its policies. Thank God Hamas is not mentioning the settlements. Hamas is calling all of Israel a settlement.
Yeah, I know that's always been. So, Dr. Notwilf?
Yes, I know.
Yeah, so I had her on a call as well one time. And she actually, when Sinwar got killed a couple of days ago now, she had a tweet that I kind of paraphrased into my own tweet. I'll read it for you here because I wanted the end of it is like the scary part to me. That like I don't think this is close to over. I mean, I think this war's iteration hopefully is relatively close to over, but the grand problem, the grand conflict, unfortunately isn't close to over in my opinion. I'm gonna read this whole thing for you and then kind of tell you why I think this, get your thoughts on it. And then we can start wrapping up. I know I've had you for a while here.
Yeah.
I said Sinwar was the mastermind behind October 7th. He and the rest of Hamas leadership have been killed. This is a major marker in the war that may bring a deal closer to the table and the hostages closer to being home. I don't know. However, it surely marks the failure of another attempt to destroy Israel, and with that, a great inflection point. The question is, will the Palestinian elites in greater society accept defeat? To paraphrase Dr. Notwilf, the greatest tragedy of Palestinians is that every time Palestinians should have accepted their defeat in the pursuit of the cause of no Jewish state, they were indulged in the destructive belief that they could still win. Will it be different now? If so, they will accept a deal that would leave the Palestinians with much less land than they want, without a right of return to their grandparents' and great-grandparents' homes in Israel, and many other bitter pills to swallow, but it would leave them with self-determination they can't find elsewhere, as they've been kicked out by the tens of thousands of the surrounding Arab nations at this point. The problem is, and this is the part that I'm like, this really is the problem that I kind of want your thoughts on. The problem is there are hundreds of millions of people around the world who are pushing them to keep fighting. If they take that route, as is most likely, the far right in Israel will use it to grow the settlements, as the rest of Israel rightfully focuses on the defense and self-preservation. And so that's the tweet. But in my mind, because the outside world is just anti-Semitic, or it just has been in the West, it's just like they've taken on this oppressor weird narrative and, reflecting our own sins onto Israel and the Jews. There are hundreds of millions of humans, if not billion, of humans that they're going to say, keep fighting. And you're Palestinian and you're already only seeing one side. You look to the outside world and you see this thing of, hey, well, this is righteous. Let's keep fighting. And you're just going to, it gets worse every time. 8,000 people died in the Nakba. How many people are dead now? 40,000, 50,000? Like, this is the worst event in Palestinian history. And even when Sinwar died, the whole thing is, he's a hero. Look how he died. When I'm watching that and go, look how he died. I mean, Gaza's destroyed. He's in this destroyed building without a hand. He barely is able to throw a stick. And but they're just, oh, what a hero. And that's what scares me. And for Israel, for my family, for my friends that are out there, but also for the Palestinians. And I don't know. That's my thought on it. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think I'm being realistic, pessimistic? Like, where do you think this goes now at this point?
I don't know. Obviously nobody knows. We do have this fantasy that it's been such a horrible outcome for the Palestinians that they will become practical. That's what I said before. You say, there's a lot of, their leaders are okay. Sinwar is dead. Nasrallah's dead. A lot of them are dead, and Abbas is 80-something years old, and is kind of like approaching a time of opportunity where there's going to be some major changes, and often these are the times in history where you see inflection points. Nasser died, Sadat took over. Sadat, as we know now, even the Israelis were short to pick up on it. Sadat immediately was interested in making peace. So there's a chance, right? There's a chance. I'm not predicting it.
I'm not predicting it either, but it is an inflection point. And
I do. Just there's something else I didn't answer. You brought up Tucker Carlson before. I really am concerned with the Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens conspiracy theory, Alex Jones complex that's growing and seems to be dominating Twitter and so much of social media podcast world. I think it's really, really bad. One of the most disturbing things, I mean, Daryl is a small part in this whole small cog in this whole wheel, but I went back and listened today to that Tucker Carlson interview that Daryl did with Tucker. And they were talking initially about, how important the myth of World War II and how, you can't even talk about things. And they talk about how you can get arrested for questioning World War II. And then Tucker makes the comment that I hadn't picked up on earlier. Yeah, especially in Austria. Now, do you know what happened in Austria?
No.
Austria is where David Irving was arrested, the Holocaust denier. And so that went by, and then the reason is filled in the blank. So then Daryl went on to make this argument about Churchill being installed by Jewish financiers and Zionists, and that's why they wanted Churchill in place at this time, implying that that's why World War II was fought. But in his interview with me, he said, "Oh yeah, that's when I was making the David Irving argument." So what Daryl led on was that this argument came, for people who don't know, David Irving is a Holocaust denier. And so Tucker was alluding to the fact that David Irving was arrested. Daryl was alluding to the David Irving argument. Daryl said that Tucker was kind of egging him on to make this argument. Now, how would Tucker know about this argument that Daryl might make? Well, if you read Daryl's Substack, because they had dinner the night before where they had discussed Churchill. So I fear that Tucker is in the process here of normalizing even the arguments of David Irving, who is a Holocaust denier. But of course, he's also normalizing Candace Owens, who has embraced all these horrible arguments about the Jews being pedophiles and the Jews killing Michael Jackson, whatever crazy stuff she says. And of course, Alex Jones, they all speak kindly of Alex Jones, including J.D. Vance speaks kindly of Alex Jones. Alex Jones talks about how the Jews killed John F. Kennedy. So it's one after another, and it's forming an entity, a non-Zionist entity. They called Israel a Zionist entity, an anti-Zionist entity, an anti-Jewish entity that reaches all the way. Now, I don't believe Trump is part of this entity, but it reaches all the way to the White House. And it's kind of unprecedented in my lifetime. And it's not getting enough attention. It's growing, mushrooming. It very, very concerning, very concerning. I don't know how to get people to wake up and fight it. The fact that Tucker Carlson is, egging on his guest to make an argument from David Irving, it's bad. It's bad.
This is what I was talking about. Where, again, I was exaggerating a bit, but this was literally what I was saying in 1920 in the 1920s thing.
Yeah.
Back in 2021, it's like this just feels very similar as to things that like the stories.
Well, but there's like this, that's like so. Like in the 30s, when Father Coughlin was preaching, or I guess it was, late 30s, early 40s. I could be wrong. It was right around that time. He was preaching about, and he had the biggest radio show, I think, in the country, preaching about all the same stuff that Dostoevsky talked about, the Jews controlling the government, the classic Jewish conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
This is not unique to pre-Holocaust Germany. This exists in the United States of America as well. Henry Ford, Charles Lindbergh,
Yeah.
that kind of openly contemptuous of the Jews world on the right. And we didn't see it on the right for a long time. This is what Tucker is dipping his toe into. And it should be nipped in the bud, but it's not.
No, like you said, it's growing. And you had, I don't remember which guest you were with, but you were talking about there's guilt of association and then there's innocence of association. That J.D. Vance or Dave Smith says, oh, no, Alex Jones is good. And Cut Tucker is fine. And then everyone just sanitizes the next person down the line.
Yeah, I forgot I said that. Yeah, that was good.
No, yeah, it was a great. You have many of those.
I totally forgot about that one. Reminded me.
It's extremely concerning to me. It very much is. And actually, I'd love to get your take on my Trump take, and then I want to ask you what's coming up, and I can let you go.
Okay, go ahead. I gotta go. Yeah.
Yeah. What concerns me about Trump and to go alongside with this rise, like what is going on in the media, is I don't think Trump's Hitler. I don't think he's wants to be a fascist dictator leader. However, if you did want to take down America's democracy, if I was my age and I had the money and the means and the connections to do it, here's how I would do it now. I think I know how to do it. I would start by being the most anti-establishment thing I could be. How would I do that? The president isn't even from here. That's going to be my first thing. I'm going to get millions of people behind me, and they're going to believe anything I say.
You're referring to Obama's birth certificate. Go ahead.
And in my mind, that was, from my memory, that was how he started this whole thing.
Yeah.
And now I have this base that they're going to believe anything I say. Because you believe that, if you're on board with me. And, I attack the establishment the whole time. Various things happen, various strategies take place. I'm in power. Now that I'm in power, I'm going to make sure everyone knows, hey, they're trying to steal the election. They're trying to overthrow our democracy. How I'm going to do that in this case, I'm going to tell everyone, hey, mail-in voting is a fraud. It's all a fraud. All my people will vote in person. Everyone's already expecting the liberals to get a huge bump in the middle of the night. Now I'm going to overthrow it. And that's a good strategy. Plus, he tried to get the fake electors in 7 states. He went on Fox News with trying to weaponize the DOJ. He did all of these things. Like, he just kind of wrote a playbook of, hey, again, I'm not saying he wants to. If my goal is to overthrow our democracy, to make America crumble in a sense, here's a playbook. You can improve upon it, sure, but you wrote a pretty good one. And that scares me as we go into 2040, 2050, 2060. Again, I think we're going to be fine. Great country, getting better. But when I kind of game theory that out, that kind of concerns me. What do you think of that? Am I crazy? Do I have Trump deranged syndrome there?
Yes and yes.
Yeah. Okay. Why do you say that?
I think there's a world of difference between cheating to win an election and wanting to overthrow democracy. Trump gives every indication that he was very happy to cheat in any way he could to win the 2020 election. How that extends to his desire to overthrow democracy, that to me is where the derangement syndrome kicks in. He wants, in my opinion, he wants to be president again for 4 years, and then he is not going to try to be president for 12 years. There's just not, because it's not humiliating for him to leave after 8 years. What he couldn't take was saying he lost. And it's as simple as that.
No, I agree with you on that. Yeah. I agree with everything there. I would say there's a world of difference between unethically trying to win an election and stealing one.
Yeah, but we listen. There are many people who believe. When I say maybe Robert Caro, who wrote the book about Lyndon Johnson, I think very famous biography. He believes that Kennedy stole the election. I don't know, but you've heard these stories that Kennedy stuffed the ballot boxes in Illinois and
I
Texas.
Haven't, actually.
Yeah.
I'll look into it.
Yeah, there's many people believe that Kennedy cheated to win the election. Now, was he trying to overthrow democracy? No, of course not. He's trying to cheat to win the election.
Again, I don't think that's who Trump is. I agree with you. I think he wants to be president again. My fear is that if a populist movement, I'm just going to repeat myself, but if a populist movement comes along and this is somebody's goal, and I would think, okay, I'm going to take this similar route now. If that was my goal, I would take a similar route into power.
I mean, we have not yet heard anybody say that they want a dictator in America, or that we've heard, I'm not saying, I mean, Darryl Cooper, hemmed and hawed about fascism, but we haven't heard anybody advocating we want a dictator. As a matter of fact, the people who are the most pro-Trump, in words, they pretend to hold the Constitution very sacred, right? Of course they don't, because they cheat. But I'm saying the hypocrisy is the tribute vice pays to virtue. The hypocrisy is huge, but the virtue is still in their mind the Constitution and the checks and balances, and they have certain good points about how the federal government's gotten too big. But the danger of Trump is that he'll be vindictive, that he will, there's all kinds of things a guy like him can do, kind of things that Nixon did, enemies list, ordering tax audits. Who knows what he's capable of? There are people, more than one, who worked with him who feel that he should never be president again because he's too erratic. I don't think any of them said that they thought he was going to overthrow democracy. As a matter of fact, some of them have now said, well, I never thought I'd say this, but like Bill Barr said, I'm going to have to vote for Trump over Kamala Harris. So listen, this is a tough one, because especially now with Israel, it's tough to oppose somebody who you so much agree with as opposed to the other person on their policies, because that personality wise and temperament wise, they're just too dangerous. Trump in 2016 did a lot of good things. The Abraham Accords, he got rid of, through his Supreme Court shenanigans, got rid of racial preferences and, various things which I really wouldn't want to trade in for the last 4 years. So, but I knew I didn't support Trump in 2016. And at the time, I thought he was a dangerous pick. I remember saying he's erratic. He can't control his behavior. He can't even control his behavior to align it with his own obvious self-interest. This is a guy who's, like I say, he's Sonny. He's not Michael, from The Godfather. And everybody knew what happened with Sonny. So so there's a huge risk with Trump. And then with Harris, you have the huge risk of her successfully implementing horrible policies, equity, racial preferences. Who knows? She would have not allowed Israel to go into Rafah. So you could say, if Harris had been president, Sinwar would still be alive. Well, that's a lot. That's a lot to trade.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I understand voting for Trump. Again, my fear for this stuff.
I'm not saying vote for Trump. I'm not saying vote for Trump, because both sides, the arguments of both sides against the other side are 100% correct. That's the problem. Both sides are 100% correct. What the Trump people say about Harris is true, and what the Harris people say about Trump is true, and I agree with both of them deeply. That's where I'm at.
I get it. All right, I can let you go. What do you have coming up next? What's coming up in your
today?
Life? Oh no, I meant like in the coming months or so, or like I assume today, just with the family.
I take it day by day. Do we have any? Which I think we're going to have John Bolton on, and specifically because I want to, the former national security advisor to Trump, because I want to specifically question him about these very issues that you brought up now. I want someone who knows him and dealt with him, and really to probe them as to how dangerous they actually think he is. I need to know that.
Hear that one.
Yeah, I would like to know that before I vote, even though I don't vote. But
I'm gonna stay updated on you and with you, and hey, listen, my goal here at Maker's Bar and in general.
What's the origin of that name, Maker's Bar?
I would have to ask the founder. So I'm the first host, but the founder, her name's Akshata. She's incredible. She started this. I had my own podcast, and she's like a successful businesswoman, and she builds businesses really more than anything. And she found like, I know I don't really like being the face of things, and like this is like a face business. And we got connected just kind of through my work. I can't really remember how at this point. She needed a host. I was like, hey, you've built, I never asked you, I'm not sure the name, but you built something that I think is really cool. I want to talk to good people. I want to talk to leaders to change the world. Like, that's kind of my goal. My podcast was called The Good of Twitter.
Mhm.
I was trying to talk to good people on both sides of different topics, and like investing in businesses, things like that. And yeah, that's how I came across here. Now our number one podcaster here, host here, I guess, in terms of content, and I really enjoy it. I think this is a great thing we're building here. But my goal, whether it's here at Maker's Mark, I think I found a home, or elsewhere, is to build up a community of good people that, who have a really good point of view on this. Is Noam, I'd love to have you on with whoever it may be, and just build that community of leaders. And I appreciate you coming on. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I hope you got a good sense. Okay, I hope you got a good sense of who I am. So I'd love to have you back on. I'll stay updated with you on Twitter and definitely through your podcast as long as you're doing it. I won't stop pushing you to go on Joe Rogan, and try and get Joe Rogan to call you.
I'm not resisting. He hasn't asked me.
I know, but I'm going to try and make that happen, because I think that'd be a valuable conversation for everybody.
Okay.
But again, Noam, thank you so much. I can let you go. Until next time, sir.
My pleasure, Troy. Nice to meet you. Thanks a lot.
Nice to meet you as well.
Bye. Bye.